Salutations, everyone. Welcome back to Victoria 3. I'm Lord Forwind. Today, we're here with a guide for Great Britain. Obviously, this is kind of the namesake country of the franchise, considering once King William of Hanover dies here, Victoria of the game's name will take the throne and rule for most of this time period. As a result, Great Britain is probably one of the nations with the most flavor and most benefits at the beginning of the game. They're set up to succeed. You can fail as them, but overall, it's quite easy to go on and dominate the world from where they are. So anyway, before we get into this, if you do enjoy or like the guide, please do leave a like, a comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so. Check out the Discord I have. Link should either be in the description or on the YouTube homepage. And overall, I hope you enjoyed the video. It should be divided into multiple chapters based off topics, so you can kind of skip to what you would like to see. So let's get right into it. Great Britain here. So at the beginning, Great Britain is the number one great power in the world. If you don't do anything, France will swiftly overtake you. But thankfully, as Great Britain, your starting situation is really good. You have all the various Canadian minor nations here that eventually you can turn into Canada themselves, or at least one Hudson Bay company. Over here, you've got the East India Company, which will kind of do their own thing. They're your subject, but they have decent political autonomy, so they may start and get involved in political plays of their own. Down here, you've got Cape Colony, which is relatively useless for you, unfortunately. And then you've got the various Australian ones, including a Maori nation over here, for those of you who wish to play as the people with the really awesome tattoos and stuff. Great Britain starts at the beginning of the game with a rivalry with France. If you want, you can continue that rivalry. If not, you can cancel it. The other thing to note here is currently you control Hanover and various other states here, which you will lose upon the death of King George of Hanover. So be prepared to have more influence freed up and stuff. You also have some other things around the world. You have Sierra Leone down here. Don't expect them to really matter at all for you. At the moment, you can't develop your subjects' lands. They do plan to change that. Once they do, well, it'll probably change the entire game, so I'll redo the guide. But they would be a early game access for Britain down here to some of these resources besides colonizing. And the last thing that really bears mention, other than some Caribbean islands, is British Guiana down here, which in my experience has a very high chance of finding gold. So just be aware of that. So overall, Great Britain sits in a strong spot. You don't have any real allies outside of Portugal down here who you get along with. You can pretty swiftly ally them. If you can get them into your custom union, that's pretty nice as well. The reality is they're not going to help you in any wars or anything, but otherwise they tend to get taken out by Spain or France later on. So keeping them alive, and if you can get them in your custom market, will give you access to some of their colonies around the world. Now, in terms of actual interesting journal entries, the British have several. You've got the Hanoverian succession, which will obviously end the Union. And you also have to confederate Australia and Canada, and there'll be other ones that pop up as well. The big one will trigger in a little while, and I'll talk about it, is the Opium Wars with the Chinese. But the big news here is that you have 3 decisions to manage your 3 largest subjects: Australia, Canada, and India. The first one here, if you can get good relations with your country's subjects in both Australia and Canada, as well as research nationalism, you can then confederate them into another colony. You'll merge 2 of them. You have to wait another couple years, and then you can merge more. The way to get this, just start improving relations with basically all your subjects. There's really no reason not to have your subjects like you. You will get more diplo power in the long run, so don't be too worried. For now, I'd start improving with at least 2 in Canada and 2 in Australia. It really doesn't make too much difference which ones you do. They will both either help you or not. the value gets paid to you will go down money-wise. It's just kind of how it works. But in the long run, they'll be stronger, more prosperous, and potentially more militarized to help you in wars. And that decision takes 2 years to repeat, and it's worth doing every time it pops up. You also have at the beginning of the game the ability to survey the Suez Canal and gain the Suez area and build the canal. Just be aware that at the beginning takes more bureaucracy than you have free. Other than that, you've got other decisions and stuff that will pop up, but that's the biggest ones. So let's look at the economy of Great Britain. So Great Britain at the beginning of the game has the third largest economy. You're behind your own subject, the East India Company and the Chinese. This will rapidly change and you'll pass the East India Company, and with a little effort you can pass the Chinese. The first thing to note about the British economy is that it's pretty much a modern functioning economy at the beginning of the game. They have 1 or 2 of every factories in their home islands, and you really don't have to change that much. The only things to note is as you progress through the technology tree, you're going to probably want to build one of the factories that you don't currently have. Thankfully, and if I can find it right here, you actually start with chemical plants, making it a pretty interesting start. Most nations lack chemical plants. What this means is, as the British, if you don't want to manage your economy, you can literally just automate all the buildings. And I do recommend you do it in case you ever end up with spare construction capacity. But you already start with decent tech, including military tech, which we'll talk about in a bit. And outside of a couple little improvements here, fixing some of your production methods in your farms and stuff, you really don't have to do that much. Your lands are already prosperous. They're going to stay prosperous. If you turn on auto upgrades, and so long as you have a decent construction capacity, your economy will by and large manage itself. In terms of unique modifiers, you do have some decent good soil modifiers in some of your provinces. You also have a very helpful South Yorkshire coal field here, which is where you should probably put your coal mines early game. Ireland has a few little modifiers out here, but overall, outside of fishing in the North Sea, you don't have too many natural benefits. Although I will say the coal melt actually extends up here into the lowlands. The only major difference between these two is their population. The lowlands here, Edinburgh, has more population, so if you want to build huge, massive coal mines there, you can. The coal mines here can get to a higher level, but you may run out of people before you get there. I tend to find Edinburgh's a little bit better to build some of your more later game industries, power plants, war machines, synthetics, and electronic industries, just because it only has food and glassworks, which you do have elsewhere. If you really wanted to optimize the economy, you could go in and delete some of these factories and improve them to centralize more, but the reality is you don't have to. The other thing to note is Britain does have some unexploited resources, logging camps in particular, but there are a few fishing wharves. If you've got the time, and you usually do as Britain, I recommend going out of your way and making sure that you just improve all the natural resources in your home islands. There's so few of them, having them available to auto-construct, which obviously they can't do until you build, will just help you in the long run. The other things to note is, while you do have some railroads at parts of your countries, some of your northern areas, specifically your most northern ones, and some of your Irish ones, lack railroads, making it a reasonably decent decision early on to throw down a railroad in every province and then leave them for auto upgrading later. London itself eventually will get access to Big Ben, which you can build from the beginning. Big Ben is worth building mainly for the throughput. The prestige is nice. It'll keep you in first place longer. But the throughput bonus applies to various buildings, will make you that much more productive in the home countries of London and Portsmouth and Canterbury over there. And that's pretty much it for their central economy. If you want to build up, you can focus on stuff like that. Otherwise, you have access to a vast market. The British market is the largest one in the world in terms of resources, although the Chinese GDP is bigger. And it's quite easy to expand it. Get Portugal, usually you can get Belgium, sometimes even the Netherlands, as well as various other minor countries, Morocco and stuff, tend to join if you improve relations or just conquer them. And each building you build is unlikely to affect the greater market. There are a few exceptions, though, and I will talk about them. The first one down here is access to the rubber plantations. You're going to want to colonize some of this area, and colonialism will be a separate section of this video. But getting rubber can make a difference. The British East India Company here should supply you with all the opium you need in the long run, making this an area of the game and one of the countries that is the most valuable to you as an overlord, because it will allow you to maintain under your military actual first aid and hospitals, which will make your troops better than most other nations which don't have access to opium, especially the Europeans, which lack an easy supply of opium if you don't sell it to them, or unless they colonize their way into opium producing regions. Before we move much further, let's look at the British laws and stuff, because they're actually in decent shape. The British, similar to the French, have a pretty modernized law system at the beginning of the game. You've got colonization, you've got police force, you've got hospitals and schools, you've got a professional army. You even have a level of voting, which puts you miles ahead of most other nations in terms of abolishing either your monarchy or breaking the power of your aristocrats, which are kind of already broken at this point. The only thing you really lack at the beginning is a home affairs department. You can choose what you like. I think historically the British would arguably go for guaranteed liberties, but I don't know exactly all of this stuff. Probably National Guard would make more sense. And it's pretty easy to change the laws to being more productive. Something you probably want to do in the long run is to change your citizenship laws at the beginning towards multiculturalism, and in terms of freedom of conscience to total separation. Why you would want to do that is you're going to be colonizing and potentially conquering nations that are not British and are not Christian. Conquering them with freedom of everything laws basically allows you to integrate their populace quickly and peacefully. If you don't, their lands are going to be less productive. Specifically the Chinese ones. You're going to get a lot of population. Even if you take a treaty port here like Macau, you can end up with a hefty population gain. Other laws to consider looking at for the British in the long run, you may want to throw on some migration controls if you don't get rid of the discrimination against populations, because otherwise you can be overrun by immigrants who don't like you and you're discriminating against. You already start with women being propertied, which is a nice change. You start with a good taxation law. Protectionism is good in the sense that it allows you to control and protect your market and your industries better. Interventionism is great for the beginning. Later on, you may want to change it depending on how your interest parties work with pushing laissez-faire. You don't necessarily like this one as an economic system, but it already has a huge amount of clout in your land thanks to the industrialists. In the long run, you're going to obviously want to change probably religious and charity hospitals away from just being religious. Public schools is something you can pass pretty early on, as well as private schools. It's really up to you which one you go for. Either is an improvement in some ways over religious schools, unless you're going to go Anglican. Public schools arguably are better in the long run. They provide assimilation. So if you're having trouble with population and you're discriminating against them still, this will help convert them to your culture. This one will do religion. It's usually easier to change the religion than it is culture, though. And overall, the British laws are in good shape. You've already got slavery serfdom changed. There's really nothing else you might want to change. The only thing you could arguably do is shift towards censorship if you're wanting to be able to suppress or bolster interest groups. Your political parties are pretty solid. You already start with parties in existence. One thing you might want to do is move the P-Light party in here to boost the legitimacy of your government so that you can pass better and more laws. You do start with welfare here, and it's hard to get rid of, so just be aware that you're going to be stuck with welfare payments for a long time, and it is probably worth not improving Social Security's level here, unless you want to have some trouble with that. Getting your law enforcement and, well, mainly the law enforcement improved early on will help keep your country stable in the long run, and obviously improving colonial affairs will help you colonize faster. So let's talk briefly about the British technology. It's important to note that the British have a already solid innovation base built in your country since you have universities. It's quite easy to max out your innovation. You can almost double it. Just be aware that early on, you probably don't have the economy to support it, but it is worth investing in it because the British can easily be the tech leader in the world. I'm not sure right now if they're ahead of France or the Dutch, but they've got really good military tech, their production tech. They already have the railroads, and they can quickly gain these. In terms of society, you're already in great shape. So what should you research first as the British? Really, you should go for pharmaceuticals into quinine here so that you can start colonizing areas with malaria, and you're going to want to do that. The other option is going out of your way a little bit to snag nationalism, probably after you get quinine. Yes, you're going to lose some overall research, but the better colonization speed is worth it. Getting nationalism unlocks the Confederate decisions here. And then the next one to consider is another decision we didn't talk about, which is proclaim the British Raj. The British Raj basically is a replacement for the East India Company. The East India Company has a disaster called mutiny, and the AI subject doesn't tend to stop it, at which point it tends to almost collapse. So getting colonial affairs to 5 will change it over, prevent the revolt at the cost of not being able to annex all these various subjects of the East India Company, which you're kind of okay with. They mainly provide manpower more than anything else to your wars and support the East India Company. So overall, fixing the British Raj is worth doing. You need to get colonial affairs to 5. You're going to have already access to 1 with where is that? You already have access to 1 through colonization, or rather 2. You'll get another from quinine. You'll get another from civilizing mission, and then finally 1 with malaria prevention. This is a later game tech. Don't research malaria prevention till you've, at minimum, grabbed most of these upper techs. The cost to beeline it early on is not really worth it. You can, but you're better off researching production and coming back to it. It is safe to research it, I would say, if there's like 5 or 6 years to research, just so that you get it before France does or the US, who are going to be your main colonizing rivals. Once you do, Africa is yours for the taking. Outside of that, in terms of production, getting nitroglycerin into dynamite will just make you have endless supplies of raw resources, lead, coal, and stuff. Since you already start using coal, building up your coal mines early on is a very good strategy for Britain. Eventually, you will use all the coal, basically. You already start with a decent construction method here, using iron frame, but it can be worth getting early on the Bessemer process. And then, if you get the chance, getting steel frame. You're probably one of the few nations that, since you can start with the steel industry and build it up, racing for that tech, obviously after you get quinine and probably civilizing mission, will give you a huge boost to your economy, and you can outpace everybody else. You can get to it so early and you can build up the economy. It's actually worth swapping sooner rather than later. In terms of military, don't worry about it. You've got a decent army. It's not till trench works gets closer to being able to be researched that you need to concern yourself with the military tree at all. Your military can fight anybody in the world at the beginning, and outside of maybe some nations like Prussia and France, you can beat everybody else. So let's talk about colonization, and then we'll probably move on to warfare, and then I'll move forward a bit and we'll deal with events, specifically the Opium Wars. So to start, let's go over colonization. So the British are the best colonizers in the game at the beginning. The only nation that can vaguely compete with you is the French. You have interests everywhere around the world. And currently you have significant interests still left to be used. So where do you want to put these interests? Well, the first major one you're going to want to put here is in the Congo and Niger, as well as over here in Ethiopia. Basically, you want to have an interest in most of Africa, and you already do. The other stuff here, if you want to get involved with helping Mexico fend off the US and stuff, you can help them there, and Texas as well. Otherwise, putting an interest over here in Japan is probably the next best use. So where to colonize? Well, you can colonize tons of places. Some are better than others at the beginning. So let's go over where to put those at the moment. So obviously, the big stuff you want to do is make sure that you get places like Australia and anywhere else that you would naturally gain anyway. So I put one on North Island and South Island of New Zealand, and probably one here in Western Australia. Those are almost guaranteed ones you want to do. Now, I would ignore Celebes over here. Most nations don't rush to colonize this, so there's no hurry. You do want to get an interest in Kenya here so that you have access through this area. If you're lucky, once you get malaria here, you manage to cut off the French from this area, which will give you access to all this land to either conquer or colonize. Plus, if you expand up the coast here, you can easily invade the whole Ethiopian Horn of Africa area. The next areas to consider, and this is a controversial decision, I would only colonize West Sahara here. I would ignore this area as well as the Windward Coast Guinea area. Ignore it completely. Instead, I might put some more interests down here in South America. This is only if you want to have any presence in South America. You don't have to do this. In fact, Argentina and Chile tend to colonize this area given time anyway. But there's some neat stuff down here. There's a pretty good chance that you find gold, which is always worth finding. And in general, it's just a nice secure area. Now, if you don't want to do this, you can stop these colonies, obviously, which is not a bad strategy. Historically, the British didn't colonize this whole area and add it to the British crown, obviously. Although you already do start with the Falklands, infamous for their trouble in the Falklands War. So the other areas to colonize, and this is where having this nice colonial map tip is very useful. These are all the various little islands in the Pacific. It's worth doing all of these. I can hardly point out that these things are almost entirely valueless for you. There's almost no resources or real population to be gained by colonizing these areas. But the reality is they get colonized quickly. They're very simple to colonize. They're usually like one or two provinces. Plus, if you want to have a presence worldwide, they're good land to take. And the time it takes you to colonize them will be about the amount of time it will take you to complete pharmaceuticals and then get quinine. So several years, about 2 years. By the time those are done, you should have colonized most of Oceania, and then you should be able to push deeper into Africa, starting colonies up here in Mauritania and the Windward Coast area. But the other one, and I can't shoot it right now because the interest is still coming in, you want to snag South Cameroon. And if you want to invade this area, you're going to want to get Igbo up here area, colonize that. That will give you access to the rubber-rich lands here, as well as nations to invade and conquer. You can just invade them. The reality is colonizing is much easier than invading. Once you get a colony, then you start invading, and then it's simply a land war which your superior troops will win. The only reason I don't urge colonizing right here is because it will dilute your colonization power, and since this land has malaria anyway, it's going to be a very slow colonization. Up here, they are not used. Down here, you technically have the British Gambia, and it is expanding. Don't get rid of it. It's still worth having. Just be aware you're probably going to gain maybe like 1 or 2 provinces there. Colonizing down here will literally just chew up your growth. There'll be a lot of single province colonies by the Netherlands and the French through here. You actually have one right here, Accra, as well. Outside of that, once you've got those colonies and you finish Oceania, snag Celebes over here. The rest of the land in the world, if you want to, and this is a bit of a waste strategy, you can actually start colonizing Hokkaido up here, which will give you a land border with the Japanese shogunate, making it super easy to invade and conquer Japan. One of the best strategies for the British is to invade the Chinese and Japanese early on, and that will allow you to do so. And then later on, go for New Guinea if the Dutch aren't already there, as well as expanding into Central Africa, getting more of those rubber lands. This is where changes in laws, going to total separation, as well as multiculturalism will help, because the population there otherwise will hate you. If you're totally multicultural and freedom of religion, they will like you, and you can integrate them without any severe problems, as well as get productive provinces. The only downside is you won't be as monolithic a culture or a religion. Anyway, that's the colonization. On to wars, probably. So, wars for the British. So you say, well, I'm Great Britain. I conquered tons of the world. Where do I go? Well, the first major issue you're going to have is with the Chinese, the Opium Wars. And we'll talk about that after this. But it's worth invading them, getting your treaty port, as well as maybe a region as well. Afterwards, where do you go? Well, if you're colonizing down here in South America, you can invade Argentina and Chile, and thereby the rest of South Africa, if you choose to. The other option here is you use your starting colony of Accra here, and invade Ghana, Ashanti, as well as expand into other provinces through here. Once you get colonies going in Igbo, you can invade Benin, Sokoto, and quickly expand through Central Africa. Other options, you could push and attack people like the Zulu and stuff down south, conquer Transvaal and Orange, get access to the relatively valuable gold mines and stuff up here that you will, they don't start here, but they tend to be found in this area, which will help you with your money. Madagascar here under the Marina Kingdom is super easy to conquer for the British and kind of looks like a nice addition to your empire on a map. Ethiopia is also easy to invade, but my personal recommendation is after you invade China is to go invade Japan. Now, if you colonize Hokkaido up here at the start by putting an interest and then a colony, it puts you in a great position to start seizing chunks of Japan from the shogunate. Their army at the beginning is made up of peasant levies and will never improve until they change that law. You have skirmish infantry, you will literally wipe out the entire Japanese army with like 20 units. So long as you keep a supply line going, which is really easy to do because they don't have much of a navy whatsoever, you will easily be able to conquer Japan, and that is 14 more million GDP and 30 million population to add to your already burgeoning empire. And if you've changed the laws to be fully tolerant to the Japanese, they're pretty happy about being taken over, surprisingly. If you don't choose to do that, other areas to invade. Be aware that the Dutch East Indies is under the Dutch, but is a very valuable region. If you can invade this area and conquer it, you will be making tons of money. It's got great resources. It's got a large population. It's pretty easy to defeat the Dutch East Indies. The danger is that you get into wars with the Dutch and other Europeans. As the British, you can beat most nations in land wars abroad, as long as they're overseas. Invading places like France are hard. They have better and more, in the long run, they will have more battalions than you. Your strength lies in your navy. Be aware that you can do raid convoys, and since you've got the strongest navy in the game, It's very easy for you to cut off supply lines for people like France, Portugal, or Spain from being able to fight abroad, and at which point you just absolutely wreck them. The danger comes in land wars or if an enemy actually lands in Britain. So make sure to leave some troops guarding your islands, as well as some of your navy patrolling in the English Channel and thereabouts to protect you. But don't be afraid of fighting wars abroad. The danger is if you get into a war where you have to actually fight in Europe. Portugal, if you're allied to them, seems pretty safe, but sometimes they drag you into wars with Spain. If they do, either abandon Portugal or rush your troops there because Spain will wreck them. If you, for example, conquer Spain in the defense of Gibraltar, which is a very logical decision, you can then try to fight a land war with France. Just be aware that their 260 battalions, by the time you're ready to invade them, is going to be more like 400 or 500. And the reality is the British just don't have the battalions and population in their home islands to fight them. They're either going to rely on your colonies, whose troops are usually peasant levies, or land that you personally colonize and develop. Outside of that, Vietnam, Siam, and all the others are nice invading areas if you don't worry about the Chinese intervening, which after your first war with China, you'll see how weak they are and how easy it is to conquer them. But reality is you could spend the entire game just conquering China. Other stuff you could do is if you want to help the East India Company, you could invade places like Burma, the Sikh, the Sindh, and try and pass them over to the East India Company. Those would also be legitimate strategies. So let's actually unpause this. I've gotten most of the buildings and stuff automated and building methods improved. I don't think I have anything else to change at the moment. We've started building Big Ben. We are going to unpause and move forward once I cancel this export. What we're going for is the death of King George and then the Opium War, and that triggers pretty quickly. So let's see. I believe the Opium Wars kick off in like 2 months here. The Opium Wars. There we go. The Qing government has announced its intent to put an end to the opium trade. This is a major concern because you export tons of opium to them and make quite a bit of money out of it. So you have the option of, we have other methods to attend to, which lets the Chinese off the hook. But why would you want to do that? Historically, they didn't, but also it's valuable for you. So to solve the Opium Wars, you need a treaty port owned formerly by China. Now, China receives a pretty nasty penalty here, widespread opium addiction, -25 offense, defense. That's what you care about. This makes their army right at the moment a pretty much paper tiger. So what you can do is you can start a treaty port war down here. I recommend starting a treaty port war rather than a conquest war at the moment. At some point, the rules will change and you can take more than one thing in a diplomatic play if they back down. But the odds are they either back down or you invade them. So start a treaty play. You want to start it here if you want to be historical, because Hong Kong is right near there. And now that you've launched it, it's worth adding some other war goals. You can either add war goals up north in the south. Just be aware if you take the province the treaty port is in, it takes the province, not the treaty port. It's kind of annoying. The best way to kill the Chinese, if you're going to do it, is demand Beijing itself. And you can also demand the areas. Right through here is the heart of the Chinese nation. So if you take these lands, they will collapse. So just be aware of taking too much in a war, because if you do, there's a chance that someone like Russia or the others will join. But the reality is there's really no reason for you to take less than you can afford. The only danger here is the infamy, and you can really take like 3, maybe 4 provinces for them before you have to worry. What you don't want to do is go over 100 infamy, because then people like France tend to get involved. And if you're lucky, they actually fight the war. The reality is, in my experience, they back down more than half the time, which is unfortunate for them and for you, because you actually want to take their lands. So let's see if they give up. Okay, things have happened. First off, the Chinese have started to mobilize their troops. Overall, I'm not that worried about them. Doesn't look like any European power is actually going to support them, which should mean they either are going to give up or we will start a war. Let's see. We should know here very shortly. It looks like they're going to surrender. And they did. So now we own Hong Kong. Great. We got 344,000 population and a province that really doesn't have anything valuable in it at the moment. The big prize here is access to silk, which you don't have other access to outside of India, and dye plantations, which you only have access to in Africa at the beginning. This is good that they back down because it saves us from going to a war, and it also really messes up them because they lost the war. There's a chance that eventually China shatters, and this is one of the first events to trigger it. Now, you also have this ability to pick rules the wave, morale damage, which is good if you want to conquer people. This is better if you want to export more money and basically get the Chinese more addicted to opium, which was a very nasty tactic the Europeans did to try and balance out all the gold they were sending to China. What this does do is it allows you to start wars later on easily against the Chinese for this whole province and then expanding further into China and just start a land front. And that's how you win the Opium Wars. It's honestly that easy. If they had gone to war, yes, there would have been a fight, but our troops are so superior. It would have honestly been a bit of a joke. These divisions here, offensive 45, defensive 50, theirs are not even line infantry. They're regulars, so it's 10 and 15. So your army is more than twice the strength that they are. It's very easy. Now, since they back down, our infamy level is not as high, meaning we could start a war against somebody else. But what we're going to do is we would start a colony up here. Unfortunately, we didn't get the world's greatest location. I believe we got one of the islands here, yeah. We'd want to wait until this colony has either gotten closer to the Japanese borders or something along the lines, or we can just ignore it all and just invade Japan. Which, to be honest, it's pretty easy to do. I wouldn't make a play for Hokkaido itself unless you want to. It's better to make a play for central Japan, like here. And if you want, you can demand more land. A lot of the time, the Chinese will intervene. We already know how weak the Chinese are, but if they do, you can then demand war goals and take more land from China. It's kind of a ridiculously how easy it is for you to conquer things. Right now, we have a loss of diplomatic stuff here. That's just because we haven't gotten rid of Hanover yet. And that's pretty much it. The British economy has already started to grow. It's already building buildings automatically. If you want, you can just ignore it, or you do it yourself. Focus on iron, coal, and tools to really grow your nation. Otherwise, use your colonies to get the trade goods, and exporting stuff, liquor in particular at the start of the game, can be very valuable. You'll get dye, you have fertilizer, you can get silk. Depending on where you conquer stuff, you can get opium. Really go do whatever you want. There's no specific need to go places as the British. A fun strategy if you want to really expand into Africa quickly is to do the Suez and then invade Egypt here. You can either do it, there's a chance the Ottomans will call you to help, but otherwise you can just absolutely smash Egypt, whose troops are inferior to you and they have less of them. And from there, you gain access to this area far sooner than if you colonize to it. I'm not going to bother to show you the succession of Queen Victoria because really not much help happens other than Queen Victoria's popularity is better than King William of Hanover. And that's pretty much it. There's not a lot of stuff you need to be aware of. Just keep an eye on your trade unions and industrialists. It's quite possible you get like strong communist movement earlier than you might expect. Solve that by putting through higher law enforcement as well as a home affairs stuff. Any stuff that prevents political movement radicalization and revolution succession speed is great. Be aware that you cannot annex your colonies, though. I will point this out. The only way for you to annex the subjects is to ruin the relations with them. You have to get the relations between them super, super low. A legitimate strategy is to ruin your relations with the Cape Colony and then annex them, getting you access to their gold mines up here, the gold fields, as well as colonizing up there sooner than going in from the coast. Downside is European might defend them, but the reality is you can beat them. Honestly, the most annoying thing about playing Britain is you have too many options to expand and you get involved in way too many diplomatic plays. And that's pretty much it as Great Britain. They're similar to France and Spain right now, as in you can kind of do whatever you want. There's no hard and fast rule. Just keep an eye on confederating stuff. The confederated nations are better. Later on, you may want to fight a war against the US. At the beginning of the game, you can easily smash the US. They have inferior battalions and military tech to you. Historically, the British beat them about 24 years earlier, War of 1812, where they smashed the American military and burned the US Capitol. You can easily repeat that. It's kind of a fun thing to do if you wanted to, retake the 13 colonies type area. The reality is, though, do whatever you want. It's not that hard. Be aware that you probably won't get Canada as Canada just because the US might colonize their way into the Canadian region. It's a bit of a bug. I hope they fix it. Solve the East India Company problems before they collapse, and then have fun invading. Egypt, Persia is a great place to invade to get oil. Places like Venezuela and stuff are great. You get all these different decisions, so you can get like land in Panama and then expand from there. These expeditions are relatively useless, but you can do them if you want to hold a cool exposition later. And anyway, that's going to be it for the British guide. There's not a ton of stuff I can help you with on this. There's not a lot of unique decisions and events yet. I suspect we'll see more, at which point I'll probably end up redoing this guide. So look forward to that and have fun conquering China and Japan. The reason I urge that, most population and best resources for you to conquer. African lands, not as valuable. And anyway, have fun, go conquer, build the British Empire. It's very difficult to match Britain's historical expansion. So best of luck. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Check out my Discord. Bye for now.